Hello, everyone. Welcome to FCC's Connecting Women conference. I'm so excited to be here with you today. We are in our second session of our four-part women series, How Women Can Be the Change for Their Finances. I'm your host, Caitlin Dubin, and I am so excited to be here with you today. We are in for a special treat with our speaker. A little bit about myself. I am a farmer from Southern Alberta. I grow grain and oilseeds with my husband. I'm a podcaster, the host of the Rural Woman podcast, and I am so confident that you are going to learn strategies and tips on how to master your money over our next hour together. As we get started, I want to acknowledge that myself and my family grow on Treaty 7 territory, the traditional lands of the Blackfoot and Métis people of the Canadian Plains, and pay respect to those past, present, and future, while recognizing and respecting their cultural heritage and beliefs and relationship to the land. Before I introduce our keynote speaker, Stephanie Holmes-Winton, there is a little housekeeping. This session will be recorded and a link will be sent out to everyone who has registered. So if you must get away or want to share this with a family or friend, it will be available to you in your email in the next couple days. As you may or may not have noticed, today's session is the second of a four-part series. After today, there will be 2 additional sessions covering information to support women in agriculture. The last 2 sessions will focus on HR practices and transition planning. If you haven't already done so, be sure to register for the upcoming sessions, and we will provide a link in the post-email event as well. If you have any technical questions, there is a blue support button on the lower part of your screen. You may also have noticed that there are a chat box on the right hand of your screen. So please drop us a hello in there and tell us where you're dialing in from today. Beside the chat, there is a Q&A box, and please feel free to ask as many questions as you have. The Q&A will be moderated, and I will be asking the questions at the end of the session, and your questions can be asked anonymously. There is also going to be polling questions throughout that will be posted, so please participate in those. Take a quick moment and let us know your feedback on those. Without further ado, let me introduce our keynote speaker, Stephanie Holmes-Winton. Stephanie Holmes-Winton is the CEO and founder of Cashflow, an education company that creates tools and e-learning for financial professionals and employees' financial wellness program. She has created an accredited She has also created an accredited certified cash flow specialist program for financial advisors. So she is an advisor to advisors. And beyond all of that, Stephanie has also written 2 books on spending and debt. So please help me welcome Stephanie to the stage.
Hi, everyone.
Hi,
Stephanie. Thank you so much for the great intro.
How are you?
I'm fantastic.
Good. I'm so excited for you to be here and for us to get all of the financial wisdom from you today.
No pressure. Awesome. All right, everyone. All right, so I'm going to be covering some basic tips and a lot of things that you might not have seen coming from your scenarios. You might not have seen these. You might not have been exposed to these things before. So I'm going to go through them, and we do have some follow-up items that are going to come out to you in the follow-up email. So watch for those. They'll include some tip sheets. There's an interactive class in there, as well as a financial health calculator. And you can use these tools to keep track of your financial health over time. So I hope you will take us up on that. All right, let's go. Let's get started here. I'll just get some buttons popping up. There we go. All right, so we will get going. Agenda. So today we're going to talk about building your own credit score. We're going to talk about spending some time learning about money every single month, how to assess your own financial health and your family's financial health. We'll get into how to design your spending plan around behavior. We'll get into exploring easy ways to get confident with investments in particular, why you should always be saving, and how to lead by example. All right. So, growing your financial capability. A lot of times when you get exposed to financial information, it may just take you to the level of knowing a fact and understanding it. And where we want to help you today is going from that to being able to explain and apply it to your own situation, explain it to someone else, apply it to your own situation, modify any things that you're doing right now. So you might be able to adapt what you learn. And where I'd really love you to get, we probably won't get this done all the way in this session, but if you use some of the tips I give you, you certainly can. We want to get you to confidence and capability. And that's where people make meaningful long-term financial change. However, many of us are in a scenario right now where we may not feel so confident about our finances. 92% of Canadians are worrying about the rising cost of living, and 40% of people borrow to buy food daily. So, what can you do about that? Well, you can't control everything, but you can control you. And one thing I've noticed over the years, especially with women, is we don't always have our own credit score. And there's some factors you need to know to build up your own credit health. First, credit scores and credit reports are not the same thing. A credit score is a 3-digit number between 300 and 900. When you get access to your credit score, it's fairly easy to read. There are several ways you can get one for free, including most likely your own online banking and various credit apps, but beware that with those credit apps, they're going to target ads at you. Ignore them. If you can't resist the power of an ad, find one that's really free, because those credit apps are definitely charging for advertising. And so they will market lending that might not even be appropriate to you. So be very careful about that. You can also pay the credit bureaus to get access to your credit score. And none of this has any impact on your credit. You can look up your credit every single day. And what it does is it helps you understand how creditors see you. The digits, the 3-digit number that you see, though, is not exactly what a creditor sees. So what you want to look for is the trend and that you're in a healthy range. You may go in to apply for something, and they may have a slightly different number that they see, because they have different factors and filters. But it's a really important thing to keep track of, and most importantly, to keep track of over time. The credit report is not a credit score. It doesn't have a digit number in there. There's no score or 3-digit number. They can sometimes be hard to read. They're usually written with a lot of codes. They kind of look like a dental insurance form when they're submitting all those codes to see what's covered. They can also be accessed for free by mail, not right now, phone, or in person. These things also have no impact on your credit. And the reason you would actually usually use this is if you've got an issue with your credit score, it's lower than you expect and you don't think it should be, there could be something hidden in there. I've seen people's car loans that have been paid off years before, and it wasn't even showing. It was still showing as owed and hadn't been paid for years. So that's the time you'd normally pull your credit report. Now, what is happening with your credit score? What factors control your credit score? For one, keeping any revolving credit so that your credit cards or lines of credit below 80% of the limit is crucial. Even better if you can keep them between 25 and 30% of the limit. Anytime you go over 80% of the limit, even if the limit's small, so let's say you have a teeny tiny credit card, maybe it has a $1,000 limit on it, and you owe $900 on it every month, and you pay it off every single month, it's still hurting you, because it's at some point in time in the month, it's over 80% of the limit. The balance is over 80% of the limit. So you want to watch that. That's also why you should be really careful about reducing credit limits. Sometimes we're like, I'll make it impossible for me to overspend, and I'll crunch down my limit. But then you may risk getting really close to it all the time. So be careful. Paying your bills on time sometimes affects your credit. More that if you pay them late, they hurt your credit. Many billers do not report on-time payments to the credit facilitators. Some of them do. Cell phone bills, we're starting to see more of that. Mixtures of credit help you with a healthy credit score. So that means showing that you can manage revolving credit, like a credit card or line of credit, as well as an installment payment, like a truck loan or a car loan or a personal loan. Beware of creditors located in other countries, including the US. They don't really have to follow our rules. So if you're getting something at a store that offers you like no payments or no interest, read the fine print, figure out who the creditor is. If it's Desjardins, they have to, which is who we see a lot in Canada, they'll have to follow the rules. But if it's somebody in another country, they may not follow the rules at all. And I always encourage people to read their cardholder agreement. I find some people feel that will be overwhelming, but in reality, it's actually really easy to read and you will learn a whole lot of things, like how high they can put your interest rate if you're a little bit late on payments. Things to be aware of for women in particular is having your name on a credit card does not mean it's building your credit score. If you are a supplementary credit card holder on an account of someone else, including potentially the farm or maybe a spouse, that is not building your credit score. And it can really cause you some issues in the future. It's important that all adults develop their own credit score. This includes children that are growing up to become to go into the world and turn 19 in most provinces, 18 in some. It's really important that each person develops their own credit, and you cannot do that when you're a secondary card holder. You have to be the primary card holder on at least one account for that account to contribute to your credit score. Nothing that you do on somebody else's credit card, even if your name's on it, but if you're a supplementary holder, it's not affecting you to the negative or to the positive. And credit scores are often used for more than borrowing. So beware that there are some things, including holding jobs, that in Canada will be affected by your credit at some point. Things that get affected are things like buying a car, buying a home, credit cards, the points programs you get offered. Something that not everybody's aware of is sometimes your home and auto insurance can be affected by your credit score. Not always negatively, but it might earn you a discount if you have healthy credit. Different types of regulated industries that require licensing and bonding may check your credit. And if you're growing a business, as you all probably know, your credit is a factor. So make sure that you are taking good care of it. All right. So we had a poll question early on, and I just wanted to take a moment to reflect on the answers. So for how did you learn about money? Most people said that it was a parent or that they still had a lot to learn. So you're in the right place. And also, even when we learn about money from our parents, they just grow up in a different financial environment than we do. So it's important that we continue to learn. We can't rely 100% on that. And the next polling question, the most popular answers around what you wanted to learn about was debt, cash flow debt, retirement planning, and personal versus farm finances. You're in the right place. We've got you covered. All right. So credit card points, quick word to the wise. And this is what one of the materials is on, is be super careful with credit card points influencing how you pay for things. So if you have a credit card that you have an annual fee on, and all the points programs generally have an annual fee, sometimes you can be encouraged to use that credit card to buy everything to max out the points. We kind of can't help ourselves. The problem is we don't do really good credit card point math. So in the handout that you'll receive in the follow-up information, we've outlined a specific example. This is a different one, but let's say you have a credit card with a $150 annual fee. Let's say you earn 2.5 points per every dollar you spend, and 200 points equals $1. Already confused? This is how they get you. It's really sometimes very hard to figure out what's earning $1. Usually it's somewhere between $100 of spend earns you $1 to $100 of spend earns you $5. That's usually around where we see these things. So this case, the person's earning 0.5%. The ones that don't commute well to dollar values are more difficult to calculate, like the ones that are not cash back, which is what this example is. So if you spend $80 to earn $1 in rewards, you have to spend $30,000 on the card to cover the annual fee. in points, to cover the annual fee. So you have to spend $12,000 to get 30,000 points to cover the annual fee. So every time you spend more than $1.25 on a $100 transaction, you're actually going backwards. And this is the problem. It doesn't take much. The chances you'll overspend using a credit card versus a debit card is very high. The average Canadian spends 15% more per transaction when they use a credit card. So if you have an expense that you have to pay anyway, and you have no emotional influence on it, home heating oil. Want to put that on your credit card? Knock yourself off. Oh, pay it off right away. But if you are going to put the groceries on your credit card, the chances you overspend are almost guaranteed. So be really, really careful about that credit card. Spend some time learning about money every month. Ta-da! You can check this one off your list. You are doing it right now. So make sure you're doing that. And I've included a couple of pieces in the follow-up material that you'll be able to get a couple of lessons in, a couple of times of learning in over the next couple of months. Assessing your own financial health and your family's financial health. So if you point your phone at this QR code, it will take you to a health calculator. We've also included the link in the follow-up materials, but this will help you measure your financial health in a way that will allow you to assess different areas. So this health calculator takes into account age, how many people work full-time, how much debt you have as compared to how much income you have, your credit score, how much you save, how much you have saved for retirement and emergencies. And it's something that what I would suggest you do is record your score. And then a year from now, use your phone, put a reminder in to record your score again, because the really big thing about your finances isn't the state you find yourself in right now. It's the trajectory you're on. And if you don't measure it, you can never know if you're doing better than last year or worse than last year. A lot of the things that we might measure could be really misleading around whether we're improving or not improving. So here's an example of one thing that the health score is measuring that I would recommend you also measure separately in addition to the health score. And this is your debt to income number. This is how much you owe for every dollar you earn. Now, in the case of farm families that are actually living on the farm property, if there is a mortgage and the mortgage is under the farm corporation, for example, I would try and carve out how much of the debt is actually the house, just for this particular example. It will give you a sense. But if not, it will still give you a healthy number relevant to your financial health. So what we're going to do is we take your gross income, so your pre-tax income, and we deduct, your gross debt, your total debt, including a mortgage, and we divide it by your gross income. And that gives us a dollar you owe for every dollar that you earn. What we have for you here is a chart that shows you a reasonable amount. Now, this includes a mortgage. So if your mortgage is inside the farm corporation or it's not easy for you to separate, then you can either estimate a value or you can reduce this range significantly by at least $1 in most cases. But here's a reasonable amount of debt for your age range. So if you're 20 to 29, a reasonable amount of debt to owe for somebody in that age bracket is about $3 to $4 for every dollar that they earn. Any more than that, and they're probably going to find themselves really uncomfortable. 30 to 39, $3 to $3.50. And you'll see this number is going down for every age bracket. Now, by the time we're in our 50s, and too many Canadians we see in their 50s owing far more than this range, but we want to be down between $1 and $1.50 for every dollar that we earn, so that we're not in a place where it's impossible for us to get rid of all debt that we'd have to be paying out of our retirement income or whatever way we're drawing income during our older years once we're in our 60s or late 70s. So this range can be really helpful to help you see if you're in a reasonable space for your age. But I think more importantly is the actual pattern. So if you are a person that's 52 and you owe $2.55 for every dollar you earn, that's a lot. And more importantly, how much do you owe next year? So this is one of those other numbers that you can put a reminder in your phone and let yourself know, hey, check this number again another time to allow us to see, are we making progress in the right direction? This number is also helpful to share across the family. Not really young children, but older children can participate in thinking about this number or understand if the number is higher or lower year after year. I think too often we hold so much stuff back from our kids when we're experiencing our own financial challenges or successes. And we think that they can't handle it, or they might tell somebody something inappropriate. And I think what we're ultimately doing is it's as if we wrap them in bubble wrap and put them on a bike and then hold on to the bike until they're 18 or 19. Then we take all the safety equipment off and push them onto the highway. And then we wonder why they don't do a great job. We can't leave ourselves in a position where the school system's trying to teach our kids this. There's too many gaps in that right now. And we can't leave them in a position where they don't know anything relevant. Facts is not enough. Real life experience is what they need exposure to. And letting them in on some of the things you're learning about money or some of the strategies you're employing in your own household and in the farm can be really helpful to help your children be more financially stable, successful, and confident than maybe the generation before them. So let's get into behaviors. We've talked a little bit about health. This definitely relates to financial health, and credit relates to financial health. But I would say this area of your finances is probably the single most indicative of your financial health and the likelihood of increasing or decreasing health. It also happens to be the thing you have the most control over. But so often, this part feels overwhelming and stressful. So usually when we're trying to improve our control over our cash flow, we lean on concepts like traditional budgeting. And I think most financial experts would probably say, oh, budgeting, everyone should have a budget. And I would say that's wrong. I think that, yes, logically, mathematically, budgets make a ton of sense. And if you were all computers instead of humans, maybe that would work. But in real life, we have a million complexities going on, and traditional budgeting requires too many small categories, too many moving pieces, and it isn't very effective with electronic spending. And the reality is, most people won't stick to it. So a solution that almost no one will follow is not a solution. Why does it not work very well? Well, part of the problem is the way we look at different expense categories. Traditionally, with a budget, we might look at things and say, these expenses are fixed and these expenses are variable. So just control the variable expenses. The fixed expenses does make sense. It's pretty easy, just add it up. It's not too difficult to deal with. But the variable expenses, there's some things in there that you don't have the ability to control a lot, or you don't have much of an impact if you do control it really well. Example, gasoline. Yes, gasoline is a very volatile expense, and it does depend, I know, depending on whether you're a farm family or an employee of the farm. It dictates how you use your gasoline and for what vehicles. It may dictate the cost of gasoline for your vehicles. But regardless, no matter how much effort you put into controlling your gasoline spend, you can only have so much of an impact. And what happens when we try to control personal finance with willpower, and we use that willpower on something that has limited effect but uses a ton of our energy, is we just get frustrated and we give up. So fixed and variable doesn't work very well. Wants and needs doesn't work very well either. And I hear people saying stuff about this all the time, kind of as a cliche. No, you don't know the difference between wants and needs, or, kids today, they don't know the difference. We used to save for everything that we bought. You may have heard that from your parents and grandparents. I know I did. but this may not be reasonable anymore. You know, when my mom was born in 1944, she loves when I tell people that. When she came home from the hospital, my grandfather had his hand on her belly and she laid on the front seat. And that was totally cool. But if I took my son home from the hospital like that, I'd be arrested. And so I may not have saved. There's plenty of parents that don't have the ability to save all of the money they need for every bit of kid safety equipment that they legally need to use. Car insurance. Some people may not be able to afford car insurance without putting them in the hole. They legally need it. There are so many expenses that we have to pay that we don't have a choice about that did not exist as the traditional budget evolved. So groceries is a really good example of something that you have extreme control over how much you spend and what you spend it on. You can't spend nothing, but you can make a new choice every single time you go in the grocery store. You can also control the frequency that you go in there. But if you think of groceries as a need, what we discovered, because I did experiments with clients on these cash flow strategies called traditional budgeting 23 years ago, what we found is people who think of groceries as a need, not that they're not, but when they're thinking needs and wants as categories, when they think of groceries as a need, then they overspend. If they think as groceries as a want, then they fight with each other. So this strategy doesn't work very well either. What we found is that there's certain expenses that have an increased risk of overspending. Things where the expenses are more frequent, if they're more volatile, if there's more variability or enjoyability, increase the chance that we spend more. Again, the grocery store is a great example. So are some of those big box stores where you can buy 2 liters of mayo at once. When we go into these places at a high frequency, which is very common, a lot of things within those 4 walls are extremely volatile. I mean, we just talked about gasoline. Gasoline is volatile. It's got nothing on red peppers. Extremely volatile. You probably all know that, right? Variability. You can buy sandwich meat and a patio set in the same store. So the ability to overspend is so high. And at least for some of us, I don't know that grocery shopping is de-stressing, but getting stuff is sometimes de-stressing. So sometimes there's a factor of enjoyability. And all of these things lead to overspending. When we think about traditional budgeting, it's just too overwhelming to the brain. There's too many categories. It's not compatible with electronic spending. The effort's too high, and it causes something called ego depletion. This is a situation that happens when we use all our willpower up on one thing, and then we don't have anything left to control ourselves for the next thing. And this has been studied at length and definitely impacts financial factors. So the way I would suggest you think about behavior-based control of your spending is to separate your high-risk expenses from your low-risk expenses. So I would say committed expenses is what we call them, things that have low to no emotional risk. So rent, hydro, utilities, mortgage payments, investments, things that are essentially bills. Some people would say, well, Netflix, is it? Well, no, it's a bill. Now you can cut it. You don't need it. Remember, this is not wants and needs. It's not fixed and variable. That is a bill. You can cut it, but there's no increased risk that if you watch too much Netflix this month, it costs twice as much. So these expenses are reliable. These things you can just add up. But it's the other expenses in the other bucket here that are super high risk. Morning coffee, groceries, entertainment, eating out. These things are extremely difficult to predict. It's very difficult to even add up what you've spent on these things. You know, if I said, okay, everybody write down how much your utilities cost you in the last month, most people could get a pretty good estimate pretty quick, or some other bill that you pay every month. If I asked you to tell me how much money your family spent on food in the last 6 weeks, you'd need a forensic accountant, right? You wouldn't know that number off the top of your head. And what we found is most people who guess are really, really wrong. So these are the expenses we need to control. And if we use our energy to control those, if we separate those, we can more easily manage our day-to-day spending. So low risk versus high risk expenses. Low risk expenses are predictable. They're mostly non-emotional. They benefit from automation. So like automating bill payments, that increases the chances you're not late. Many of these things are needs, and some of them are fixed, but that may not be exact. Gasoline is a low risk expense. High risk expenses are unpredictable. They are very emotional. They don't benefit from automation. In fact, your chances are if you use automation to refill your Tim's card, you're going to spend more and you're not even going to notice. Some of these expenses are needs, like groceries, and some are wants, and many of them are actually variable. Here's some examples. Low risk expenses: gasoline, mortgage payments, car insurance, utility, saving for retirement, paying off credit cards, car payments. And high risk expenses like groceries, eating out, entertainment, hobbies, vacations, clothing, that sort of thing. When you are looking for advice on cash flow, you may look to a financial professional, you may reach out to an institution, but when you're thinking about getting advice on cash flow, I would encourage you to look for things that are more like this cash flow plan description and less like budgeting. When you're designing your own way of behaving, look for things that feel like this cash flow description and avoid things that feel like this budgeting description. Cash flow or behavior-based spending brings up feelings of control and financial freedom. That's spendable. Those spendable expenses, one of the smartest ways to control them is to actually set up a separate account, no fee, preferably low fee or no fee, and just spend from that each week. That makes it so much easier for you to see where you're going and tell how much money you have left to spend. And you're not trying to do the mental math of all the bills coming in and out. So that should bring you feelings of control. It also lets you know what your means is. And I think so many of us, we talk about, you should live below your means. What's your means? Do you know I've never gotten anyone to define that properly? They don't really know. We just, less than you make. How much less? Nobody knows. So getting a clarity on how much you can afford to spend each week on the things you can control gives you a feeling of control. Cash flow plans or behavior-based spending doesn't banish anything. You shouldn't be unable to do anything you want. You should be forced to prioritize. And when everything's a priority, nothing is a priority. So you do want to be in a position where you have a limited amount of money you're going to spend every week on the things you can control, which forces you to decide which things are most important to you. But nobody should be dictating, or you shouldn't be punishing yourself by never letting yourself have the things that are important to you. You just have to sacrifice things that aren't that important if something else really is. This kind of strategy is ideal for day-to-day spending, especially with high frequency expenses. This is very behavioral, and if you just have a default behavior of spending out of this one account, it helps you stay on track. And these things should be written down. You should have clear, easy to follow guidelines with your family as to what you're willing to spend weekly on the things you can control. On the other hand, budgeting brings up feelings of restriction. It can focus on what we can't have. It can turn family members on each other. It can frustrate kids. It doesn't necessarily make it easier for them to understand money. Budgets are not all bad. They're great for projects. Anything with a beginning and an end, a budget does really well with, like a trip or a renovation or a project on the farm. Excellent use for a budget, but day-to-day spending, not so much. Budgets aren't really behavioral. They're very mathematical, and that's fine if we're dealing with stuff that's all logical, but human beings are not. And if you're listening to me right now and you're saying to yourself, but I'm logical, probably not. We're not. In fact, if your argument with yourself is that you are logical, chances are you are more susceptible to making emotional decisions and just being completely unaware. Budgeting also is usually around adding up all the expenses and then trying to figure out what to change, but not usually knowing what. And often it's in a written list form, or it requires envelopes or jars for you to stay on track. And that's just simply not feasible. So that's a little bit about behavior-based spending. So we're going to move into the next idea here, which is easy ways to get confident with your investments. So the number one thing I would say is if you have any investments, Google them. I've been shocked at the number of people who have never thought to do this. And then I realized I should probably tell people they can do this. So I've got an example here of mutual funds, but you can Google pretty much any retail investment you've bought. So if you buy an individual share or stock, if you've bought something called a segregated fund, which usually has an insurance product in it, if you've bought anything that kind of trades or is against the market, is fluctuating in value, you should be able to look it up. We'll use mutual funds as an example because they're one of the most popular retail investment products. So these things can be bought in packages or one on its own. They are usually available across various risk levels. So you can buy a mutual fund that's very low risk, and you can buy a mutual fund who's very high risk. There's a cost. All investments have a cost. If you're dealing with an institution that tells you the fees are no load and therefore no sales charge, that does not mean free. It actually means that when you buy the investment, you either get less valuable units or less units per dollar, because there is a fee, a charge. It's just not a sales charge. Everything costs money. If somebody's managing your investments, a firm, an individual, they're earning money from it. So do expect to be paying for it. When you look up a mutual fund, for example, type in the entire name into Google. Fidelity has a great fund tool that you can look things up. Type the whole name in. Make sure you pay attention to the series. It might say A series or F series at the end. You want to make sure that you look at all of those details and type the whole thing in. And you'll be able to look at things like, how much is the expense ratio? It could be 1.8%. It could be 1.2%. It could be 3.5%. And those numbers make a big difference. There's over 5,000 mutual funds in Canada. So there's a lot of them, but there's a lot of crossover. The other thing you can look at is what types of underlying holdings there are. So, when you look at a mutual fund and you scroll down the page, you'll see usually like the top 10 holdings. So it might tell you it owns shares in this bank and this transportation company and this grocer and et cetera, et cetera. Well, you might be holding 3 funds that hold all the same top things, and maybe one of them costs more and maybe one of them costs less. But a really important activity for you to become more confident with your investments is to look these things up. Index funds are another kind of mutual fund. They just ride the index, so they don't tend to fluctuate opposite the index. That doesn't make them safer. It doesn't make them more risky. Look at the risk tolerance of your fund. And you can hold mutual funds in different types of accounts. You can hold them in an RSP, you can hold them in a TFSA, or you can hold them in an open account or non-registered account. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But my number one suggestion to you is look up your funds. It's probably the easiest way to get more comfortable. It might look a little overwhelming when you first do it, but once you read through a few times or check in a few times or look up a few different funds, you start to spot the easy comparisons, the expense ratio, how they've done over time. Not that that's a guarantee of how they're going to do. The funds that they hold, how old they are. Those are all really important things that you can be paying attention to. So that'd be my big takeaway there. Look up your funds. And if you have seg funds or anything else, you can also look those up. So Google your investments. Some takeaways when it comes to RRSPs. This year's contribution limit room is $31,560 or 18% of your prior year income, whichever's less. This room's not regenerated. If you take money out of your RSP, then that room's dead forever. It's gone. Anything you take out of an RSP, even if it's turned into a RIF, a registered retirement income fund, it's 100% taxable like income, like a salary. So you can't control it. It can't be dividends. It can't be capital gains. It's income, like interest income or like a salary. It's 100% taxable always. If you take money out of an RSP, there will be withholding tax as well, usually 10 to 30%, which may or may not cover the actual tax bill. So be careful. RSP loans are still available. Sometimes they make sense, but I would suggest you be very cautious. borrowing for RSPs unless it makes a lot of sense. And if you do happen to trigger a tax refund, make sure it actually gets a job. Too many people put money in RSPs thinking they're going to earn a bunch of tax refunds back. Then they tell themselves they're going to put the tax refund to work, but it gets in their bank account, and then the magic fairies get in there and eat all their money, and they don't know where it's gone, right? Like poof, our money's gone. And so be really careful. If you really do something like that, you want to make sure that you are not, that you're putting the tax refund to work and it's not just going to evaporate into the ether. Spousal RSPs are still a thing in Canada, but it's based on the room of usually the higher income earner is usually doing the contribution into the spouse's RSP, but then you have to wait 3 years to take it out, and you can't open new spousal RSPs and take it out of the old one. It's the same difference. You have to stop contributing for 3 years before you begin to withdraw. So just be aware of that. Tax-free savings accounts are a little bit newer. These have a $7,000 limit this year. If you were 18 or older in 2009, there's $95,000 of room in your TFSA unless you've contributed to it. The room is regenerated after you withdraw. So think of it like a footprint. You take something out and it leaves a space for you to put that money back in. Just be real careful. You don't do it in the same year. CRA is being real mean about that, and they're enforcing some penalties and fees on that. So be careful. It's not a savings account. Do not use a TFSA as an emergency savings account. You will find yourself in trouble. It should be called a tax-free investment account. It should be used much more similarly to an RSP to create long-term resources. This one has nothing to do with your income. As long as you're over 18 and you have a valid SIN number, you can actually open a TFSA. It's not protected from bankruptcy like RSPs, though, and the contribution room doesn't expire. So you don't get to an age where you can't put money in your TFSA, unlike your RSP. This is a really important visual. I really hope you guys take this all in. I find no matter how many groups of people I teach about money, no matter how many broad life experiences or who I run into, there's often a lot of confusion about this. So imagine that an RSP and a TFSA, they're just buckets, they're containers. So you cannot buy an RSP. You cannot buy a TFSA. You buy the investments that go inside. So they're buckets. When you put money in the top of an RSP, CRA says, let's pretend you didn't earn anything of this money, and we'll give you the taxes back. So if you put 10 grand in here, we're going to pretend you didn't earn that $10,000 and give you the taxes back on it. But when you go to take this money out, it will be fully taxable regardless of your age. Now, the hope is that your tax rate would be much lower by the time you take money out of your RSP, but you have no idea. Nobody guarantees what your tax rates will be at any given age. Also, if you're taking money out of an RSP, when you're older, when you're over 71, it's got to turn into a RIF by then. And then the government decides how much you take out, which could drive your income higher. And it can threaten resources like old age security, which is income tested. So RSPs can be a good tool. What they shouldn't be, what all financial choices shouldn't be, is defaults. You want to think about what makes sense for you. So if somebody in your household has a full pension, an RSP is going to create a fully taxable income. So is the pension, so is CPP, so is OAS. You just have tax on tax on tax. So just be really conscious of that. A tax-free savings account, when you put money in the top of that bucket, Revenue Canada goes, meh, good for you, but you're not getting anything back from us. However, that money can grow in the same types of investments, anything you choose that's suitable for you, over the same amount of time or longer because they don't expire. And every dollar you take out of that is fully tax-free. If you have saved $1 million in your tax-free savings account and you take it all out in one day, it's not taxable. Using a combination of these two programs, these two buckets, is a good idea for most Canadians, but you should always evaluate your situation depending on what your resources are likely to be at retirement. All right, always be saving. We're coming closer to the end. I'm going to be taking some questions in just a minute. Emergency savings should be treated like a bill for life. This is a lifelong activity. Too many people have two specific things get in our heads when it comes to emergency savings. One is that we think that we can't afford to do it. So instead of doing a little, we do nothing. We think of a line of credit as a substitute for emergency savings. It absolutely is not. And often we underestimate how long it really takes to build up a savings account with 4 to 6 months of expenses in it, which is really what you need. So I found the mindset to get around this to help you really be on track is always save. Treat it like a bill. When you're retired, you should still be saving. The roof does not care that you're retired. If you were in a salary job all your life, when you're retired, no, you can't get fired, but stuff still breaks, and only some emergencies are caused by a loss of income. So always be saving for emergency. The worst thing that will happen is you save too much money and you can take half of it and do fun things with it. So that's the worst case scenario. The other thing that I would recommend you're always saving for is short-term goals, things you really want, about 6 to 18 months out, things that are motivating. They shouldn't actually be very practical. Paying off your credit card's a great debt repayment goal. It's not a very effective goal for getting the whole family on board and changing your behavior. But, a trip to Disney really is, or, buying that new snowmobile, that could be a really exciting goal for the family to get behind. So short-term savings and emergency savings, you should always be saving for. And my last little point here, and then I understand we have quite a few questions, and we'll go to those, is to lead by example. And I've left lots of things for you guys to review. When we're thinking about kids, how old is too old or old enough to learn about money? I would say about 4. About 4, they can really understand. And so we actually have an ebook and some other materials for you for children to learn about money. And I would highly recommend you take a look at that. It's going to come out to you again in that follow-up email. With kids as young as 4 making tiny purchases. I did this with my son when he was 4. We gave him loonies at the beginning of the grocery shop. And he had to learn what an adult would have to learn. You have to buy things you might not want, but need. And then with the leftover, you can decide if you're saving some, if you're going to splurge on something, what the splurge would be. And it has resulted in a very responsible 17-year-old. So these types of things, really easy things, really light things when they're really little, like 4, by the time they're 8, they can be tracking savings and setting personal financial goals and learning about that spendable idea I talked about earlier, about the family having an account that every week we put our spending money in it, and that's what we spend on the things we can control. By the time they're 12, they can be Googling mutual funds and learning about financial planning concepts, nothing too heavy, but just understanding some of the basics. By the time they're 12, they can help with things like grocery shopping as well. By 16, they should be able to independently manage more complex shopping decisions. You should be able to send them with a list, maybe some guardrails, but those are really important experiences for them to have with you. And by 18, they're in a position where they're starting to make their first potential debt decisions. They're likely exposed to credit cards. They can access a TFSA. So you really want them in the right place by the time you get there. So just some other tips for you, learning about saving. It's a crucial life skill. If you're not doing it, they're not going to do it. Learning about borrowing is a fact of life. Teaching your kids that credit cards are bad or debt is bad is not helpful. It's a financial power tool. They need to learn how to use it, not how to be afraid of it. Imagine if your child was being taught how to use the combine. Now, would you teach them by going, "This thing is terrifying, don't go anywhere near it"? No, you would show them exactly how to safely use it. That is the same thing. Credit, as you learn about your own credit, share what you learn. Share about potential mistakes that you've made and be there when they apply for their first card. They should learn about spending by doing things like shopping with you and listening to you as you make decisions about different types of expenses. And finally, learning about investments. That's something that's important for them too. And that's something that they can do without getting into any of your overly personal financial information that you may not want to share. Reviewing your child's RESP with them is actually a really great way to expose them to investment ideas. All right, so that's what I wanted to share. We've got lots of follow-up information for you coming in that email. So anything that you're going, I didn't get that. Not only is this recorded, but we have some things to help you keep learning from today's session. So let's jump into some questions.
Stephanie, the audience has made my job as a moderator so easy because the questions here are absolute fire. But I would be remiss to not discuss the discussion that we had in the chat about does anybody actually find grocery shopping de-stressful? And it's more of an emotional risk, especially if you go on an empty stomach.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yes. Some people will say shopping in general, retail therapy. It may not feel de-stressful from looking at the prices, but the feeling of getting things for many people is to some degree soothing. And otherwise, we would all be much, much, much more frugal with our groceries. It is a tempting place to be, and definitely if you're hungry.
Absolutely. A question that came in that I'm also curious about, if you have any experience or no, does online ordering of groceries change people's spending habits versus being in the store?
I would say yes. I haven't seen any data to support that. I have seen anecdotal evidence because you're seeing the total as you're picking things. You're also seeing comparison prices often more easily. One of the challenges with online shopping is it doesn't necessarily save time if you've ever actually gone and done it. Depending on what you're looking for and how the search function of the site works and how efficient it is or how many things they substitute, it could actually be more complex. But in the experience I've seen people have of seeing the total in the cart before they hit submit and going, I'm going to pull these 3 things out. And they would never do that in the store.
Absolutely. So one of the other questions that came in, really, how do we start with cash flow planning?
Yes. So the first thing you really need to do is figure out what those committed expenses are. So those bills, what are your actual, not your groceries, not the things that you have any influence over the cost in a given month, but those things that are not written in stone, but super predictable. Figure out what those things are. Figure out how much your income is. And then you need to look at the gap between those numbers and pick an amount that as a family you're committed to spending each week. And that'd be the first thing I would suggest. I think no matter what, everyone needs some confines, some limits, some structure, because otherwise what we're doing today, given the number of transactions and the ease at which we can spend, it is very difficult to control cash flow without putting some kind of governor on it. And that limitation, even if it's, most of what's left over, I would encourage that. I would encourage you to try and contract it a little bit. That limit is so functional. The other thing I would be doing to get started in cash flow is then after you figure out what your bills are, then examine those committed expenses and see if there's anything you don't value that you would prefer something else. So play the this and that game with yourself. So I'll pick on poor streaming services because they're getting picked on a lot lately. But if you look at, we spend $600 a year on streaming services, it would be way nicer to go spend a week at so-and-so's cottage. Maybe we can get that for almost the same amount. Or we would much rather prefer putting our money into this. But often what we're doing is we're not playing the this and get that game with ourselves. We're playing the get through to the end of the month game. And that causes us not to stop and go, wait, do I want this more than that?
Right. It's prioritizing.
It's really
your
hard
spending
to do.
and what you value, right? So, what are your thoughts on paying off a mortgage early?
I think that's great as long as you're not doing it instead of saving. So paying off a mortgage early, and I assume the person asking the question might be saying, paying it off really early, let's say they've come into some cash or they have some cash, can trigger a penalty, by the way. So if you have $20,000 and your mortgage only has that much left on it, but you were supposed to pay it for another 3 years, if you pay it off early, there'll be a penalty. The penalty is cheaper than the amount of interest you were actually going to pay them over the next 3 years. So just FYI on that. I think if you have the resources to do it, paying off your mortgage early is really effective because that interest rate is only controlled for the term of your mortgage. So often we get what I call mortgage myopia, where like my mortgage payment is this much and it will be this much for 30 years or 25 years. No, the whole balance will be exposed to the rate of the day the next time it renews. So if you can do it, it makes sense. If you're doing it, but you're leaving consumer debt there and you're not paying that off, if you're paying off your mortgage really aggressively, but you're not saving for emergencies at all, you're filling one thing, but you're creating a hole in the other side. So my preference is to try and balance goals, saving and paying down debt simultaneously. When we do them in silos or when we do them in sequence, we tend to open up the other side of the risk way worse. So for example, if you only pay down debt, that's all you do with your extra money, you're only paying down debt. The second you have an emergency, guess where it's going? The credit card. So then you're like, ugh, and you give up. And that's one of the big issues is it's not math. It's not math. It's behavior. If something's going to get you off track and make you frustrated, be aware that you don't want to design a plan that puts you in that position. So yes, paying off a mortgage early, yay, as long as it's not creating too many consequences.
Right. I love how this question is going to lead into this next one. It says, as a rancher, how do I start or even prepare a retirement fund?
Yeah. So sometimes in agriculture, and by the way, I have a background in agriculture. I went to the Nova Scotia Agricultural College. I worked on farms for years. And so the answer is, as a rancher, it kind of depends on your long-term plan, knowing that you can't guarantee the future no matter what you do. Are you planning to sell the ranch? Are you planning to hand it off to family? Is that even something you can tell if it will work right now? Like you could be 25 years old, you just took over the ranch that from your family and you're assuming you'll have a next generation to pass it to, but maybe you won't. So you can hedge your bets by creating investments early so that the worst case scenario, if you end up in the scenario where you can sell the ranch and you get some revenue from that to support your retirement, if you happen to have too much money because you also started saving for retirement, then that's like the worst case scenario. That's not that bad. A TFSA might make sense depending on how you pay yourself and how your income shows up. And a TFSA would grow tax-free. If you have many, many years, that can be a very powerful tool. But I would start by putting something away regularly right now.
Right. There was a lot of interest about TFSAs specifically. And can you talk more about not using it like a regular savings account and what you should be using it for instead?
Yeah, I think those got misbranded, to be honest. I remember when they came out, and I remember going into the bank myself and just getting so frustrated with them because they were selling it as a savings account because it's called a tax-free savings account. An RRSP is called a registered retirement savings account, but it's never been marketed as that. It's always been marketed as long-term. And that's the way we should look at a tax-free savings account. We should very much consider it a retirement account. If you put money in it for emergency savings, you've got three problems. One, there are a whole bunch of rules about putting money in and taking money out. So you could inadvertently trigger a penalty by taking contributions out and putting them back in the same year. And it's very difficult for you to predict the consequence. And they're being very aggressive right now about those particular things. The second problem is that when you use tax-free savings account for savings, then typically it's in a high interest savings inside of that bucket, that TFSA bucket, right, which is ruining the value of the TFSA. Yes, interest income is 100% taxable, but the amount of interest income you would earn on even $95,000 in a year is puny. And that's the least likely asset class to grow in the long term. So you're using your most tax efficient bucket to put something that is technically heavily taxed but earns very little. So the tax cost is very small. So you're not really getting anything from it. And I think the third big mistake of using it as a savings account is you're wasting the space on short-term things. And the real power of a tax-free savings account is if you max that thing out and you fill that from 18 to 65, 80, whatever, it is going to be extremely powerful.
Yeah, for sure. I love the bucket analogy. It just makes so much sense to me visually to see that. Another question is if we shouldn't be putting, our short-term savings in the TFSA, where are we putting those savings, like the emergency fund or funds that you're saving for your kids? Where are you putting those?
Fund saving for kids' education, the RESP is the best place because not only will you get choices for longer term investments, because 18 years is still a pretty long term, you will also get government grants to top up a portion of your savings. So that's where I would put money for children. When it comes to saving for emergencies, a no fee or low fee high interest savings account is the best place. Yes, if it earns a little bit of interest, you're going to get a tax bill for $8. Just put it in the form. It's fine. It's not the end of the world, but that's the best place. Just a regular old high interest savings account that you can get money in and out of it with ease.
Right. Couple of last questions. We are running over time, but I feel like they're important to ask. When farm debt feels very overwhelming, do you have a suggestion of who we can talk to and get advice from?
Well, I sure hope they can connect with the folks at Farm Credit Canada to get advice about the current debt scenario and if there are any options to change things. I think looking at your personal cash flow, are there opportunities to adjust how much income you're taking? Also, are there any things on the farm that could be generating revenue that aren't right now that can help minimize debt? Another big one, and I'll drop this bomb and then leave, I think, is really watch the non-fully utilitarian vehicles in farming. So take care with things like the big fancy truck. It just take your time with those. Try and personal vehicles, even if they're partially on the farm, partial for farm use. If you're driving around in it personally, if you go to town to buy anything but farm supplies with that truck, it's somewhat personal use. Try and buy those things in 3 years or less. It's going to give you a stomach ache when you see the payment, which is going to slow you down and maybe back down on that expense, because that's a bad one I've seen.
Right, for sure. Well, thanks for dropping that on us, Stephanie.
Sorry.
Before we say goodbye, thank you honestly so much. I have a whole notebook full of wisdom from you today, and I know our guests did too.
Thanks for having me.
Well, friends, that does it here for our time today. I hope you were all able to take away actionable insights that will leave you ready to conquer your financial challenges. You will receive a link to a recording in a few days. And as mentioned before, please do not forget to register for our next 2 upcoming series to complete the FCC Women's Series. You will also receive an email shortly in your inbox with an evaluation. So please fill that out to help FCC with their future event planning. On behalf of FCC, thank you so much for joining us here today. Have a wonderful day.